Okay, thank you all, and thank you everybody in here. The room is very full. I'm sorry for that, but I guess that's a good sign. It hopefully also means that we're going to have a more intimate discussion rather than a theater style, anonymous way of dealing with issues. My name is Bernie Kite. I'm from the WTO, and we have a panel today that will look at the potential that e-commerce and maybe even the digital economy at large offers to a diverse group of individuals and economic operators. We hope to learn from the speakers what is needed to ensure that this potential translates into opportunities for inclusivity, in particular for women, local and indigenous communities and youth. And we have an incredibly, I think, impressive panel. I should introduce them, but I'll do it quickly. We have Vice Minister Marine Ratnik from Estonia, Luc Triangle from the International Trade Union Confederation, Josie Morris from WooCool, myself I don't have to introduce, and Tanya Tewenu, I hope I pronounced that correctly, from the Tsamati Maori Trade Board. They all come from very different perspectives and they come with very different stories, and that's why we thought it would be interesting to get you together. They will talk about different matters, but they will all direct the same idea. It's like, what are the do's and don'ts, in making e-commerce work for everybody? And how do you ensure, and this is, I think, the general theme of this conference, how you ensure that governments, business, and civil society work together on that? Now, what I'll do, I'll start with a few questions, or a question, I think, for each panelist, and they will respond shortly to that. I may come to a second question, and then, if time permits, and I hope it will, I will open it up for questions and discussions. So I'll pretty much stop here, and I'll start with the first question, and I want to go to you, Marine, if that's okay. I mean, you're here, you're very busy, you're the head of delegation of an important member of the WTO. That means that most of the time is spent on the other side of the road, in the ADNEC, and probably also on the issue of today, electronic commerce. I mean, we'll come to that at a later stage, but it's very interesting to have you here because your country is a really good example of how a country or a government can deal with electronic commerce. So can you tell us a bit more about how you embraced digital services and digital economy and what it did for the country?
Yeah. Thank you first. Thanks for having me. Great to be here, getting out from there, actually. That's always a good part of this kind of conferences. Yes, indeed. Estonia is, we are called also one of the world's most digitalized countries. Our public services are digitalized up to 99%. There's one thing literally you can't do online, which is getting married. Divorce papers you can hand in already online. So, and it's not even a joke. In that sense, we have embraced digital economy already 20 years, 24 years. I mean, the paperless government exists since 2000, and that has been a very clear decision on the political level, meaning that digitalization is not about the technologies, it's not about e-commerce really, it's about the political leadership. And one point that we always have been, I mean, it's raised with us, but look, money and the resources that you need for that, it's the opposite. We regained our independence in '91, and we were very scarce of resources, including human capital. Therefore, it's 1.3 million people, you have to imagine, and you have to run a state like any other. Take it bigger ones, US or India, you name it. But the state system has to be the same. So our idea was that we try to put state services online as much as possible. We digitalize everything because that actually gives us more time, resources, less bureaucracy, easy to do business and things like that. So therefore also from that mindset, which is also a key word in it, is growing also the element that we are one of the most innovative countries. We have the most unicorns per capita. So it comes hand in hand. So you as a government part in this digitalization and the kind of enhancing the digitalization is that we see us as an enabler, meaning that you give the opportunities to digitalize, to innovate, to use new technologies. You don't necessarily kind of limit via legislation too much, and that's where it flourishes.
Hmm. Just a very, very quick follow-up question or remark. I mean, do you then feel that you are still in control as government in terms of your economic policies, or because of you digitalize everything? I mean, in a way, it tries itself, no? Is there ever either fear that as government you lose control? If you...
No, why? How? I mean, that's the main point, which is always asked as well. That well, when you digitalize everything, how do you follow that? It's the opposite, actually. Meaning that the logic is how can I follow, for example, that piece of paper that you have in front of there if I would guess that there is my data on it, let's put it that way. So you hand it to there and I have no idea that it moves around somewhere. Best example is medical data. So you have a medical data in one hospital on the paper, they hand it over to doctors, you don't know where it ends up. When you put it everything in digital, any movement that you do digital leaves a mark. There's a footprint which you can follow. So, and Estonian public services are set up in the logic that the data is mine. Me as a personality, me as a citizen, meaning that I can go and claim against the state when it has viewed my data without my permission, literally. So, and I can see it because I can say there is an access or there isn't an access. So, and it's actually the other way around. So, and we focus our services on citizen-centric, meaning they are all set up by the logic that it's useful to a citizen, not the other way around.
Okay.
So, and all the digitalization is done in the public-private partnership, again, because of the scarce resources. So state cannot build up all the systems. You need the technologies, you need the counterparts in private business in order to support that.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. Josie, I want to turn to you. Your company is a pioneer in the use of pure wool packaging. I don't know if you know the company, but if you don't, you should look it up. It's really amazing what they do. You're B certified. You've won a lot of prizes as company. And what you do, you basically allow to use fewer ice packs, if I correctly understand, use less material for the shipment of food and perishable goods. So that reduces cost and at the same time is more sustainable. Well, that sounds like music to everybody's ears, in my view. And from what I understand correctly, I mean, during the COVID-19 pandemic, you saw many businesses starting to engage in e-commerce, where others didn't because there were barriers that existed in the e-commerce area, or in more practical areas or pragmatic areas like shipping costs. Now, in the experience of Cool and in the interaction with your client, I mean, have you been facing other barriers when the company started, was set up, and tried to engage in e-commerce?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, there's so many answers to this question, so I'll try and keep it succinct because I can talk for a long time. So as you say, I come at this from an MSME point of view, so we're a media business based in the UK. And I was saying actually to Tanya at the beginning that it's quite interesting, we have a mix of all different bodies sat around this table. So I will be coming at this from a UK-based business, a small medium business, and one that actually a lot of these challenges I've seen within other groups I sit on are international groups. So there's a group I sit on with the WTO, which is a business advisory group with other small and medium businesses. So these are kind of challenges that we've seen actually within that group as well. So there are some challenges that are UK exclusive. I think Brexit might be one. Should I mention it around this table? And for those who are from the EU, we do want to trade with you. So that's coming from business, not the government. So yeah. So jokes aside on Brexit, obviously that's a specific barrier or has put challenges in place, but especially for perishable goods getting into the EU. That's been a big challenge. We supply to a number of food companies who do ship cheeses, sorry, anyone who's French, and ship other goods into the EU, and obviously that's become a barrier. But that's kind of more UK and maybe EU specific. I think the wider country challenges, the wider world challenges come really, e-commerce, it's relatively easy to set up a website. The text there, most 8-year-olds can set up a website now. I think my nephews certainly can set up websites much quicker than I can, which is scary. But the challenge actually comes when you're physically. So services, probably a little bit more straightforward, but there are some legal implications. But I think as a manufacturer, which is what we are, when you're then shipping goods, so once you've got your website set up and then you're going to go and ship, when the systems aren't in place that then are no longer digital, such as paperwork, where you're having to physically take a piece of paper from one port to another and hand that over, that's when the challenges come. Because if you don't have that paper, like you say, that paper gets lost.
That can be changed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so those kind of things obviously are a barrier. And then cost. I mean, particularly over the COVID years, what we saw was a big increase, and I'm sure everyone around this table is aware of the massive increase in shipment costs. For example, we shipped to the US, and a shipment that used to cost £3,000 went up to beyond £12,000. So in terms of that, that's an obvious barrier, especially if you're in a lower margin type of industry such as food. And then I think the biggest challenge from a small and medium business point of view is then expertise in house. You know, it's having the confidence, and we hear this time and again on the WTO group and then on the International Chamber of Commerce group, is around the paperwork and the complexities that come with something like export, when really if we can digitalise more and more of it, it becomes simple. You've got the traceability, you eliminate the paperwork, you eliminate the driver forgetting to take it off his seat. Those things that are human errors, you start to eliminate. So I think from where we're sitting, again, I can only speak of what's around me and what I've heard, but I think they're probably the main factors. So cost, complexities such as actually physically paper and physical paperwork, which I think can be improved with digitalisation, and I think the other thing is around IP, so that brings in legalities and making sure there's some joined up conversations around protection of IP and ideas, because once you go over borders, you want to be able to protect whatever you're shipping out.
It's an interesting point. We should come back to that later, I think, particularly protection and the legal challenges you face when you digitalize, because that's where I guess it gets more difficult to actually have the information, have the data, but also know what you can and cannot do with digitalization. Tanya, I mean, over to you. In your native New Zealand, I mean, the relationship between the government and indigenous Maori is underpinned by New Zealand's founding constitutional document, the Treaty of Waitangi, on which I'm definitely not an expert, but you are. It gives rise to a partnership of mutual good faith and mutual benefit. Now, you're an expert on this. How has this partnership shaped New Zealand's participation in multilateral trade agreements, particularly regarding e-commerce?
Well, thank you for the question, and also thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel. Before I answer the question, I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our hosts, the mana whenua of Abu Dhabi and United Arab Emirates. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan and Crown Prince Sheikh Khalid bin Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan for their hospitality, and the people of Emirates for their hospitality and their kindness in hosting us here in their land. Nā reira, so therefore, salam alaikum, tēnā koutou katoa, and good afternoon to everybody present. My name is Tanya Te Whenua. I am the Deputy Chair or Co-Deputy Chair of Te Taumata, our Māori Trade Advisory Board to the New Zealand Government. And Te Taumata itself was born out of the process that you allude to in the question around, in particular, we have experts in the room with us who were championing this process, particularly around New Zealand's participation in the TPP, TPPA, and later in the CPTPP. And the e-commerce provision within that was critical to what was raised as a claim in a particular tribunal that we have in New Zealand, which is founded on our constitutional framework, the Waitangi Tribunal, which underpins the relationship that Māori, Indigenous peoples of our country, have with our government. So this thing, e-commerce and digital trade, is what I like to call a two-sided taiaha. It's a coin with two sides. That definitely for Māori, and with respect to inclusivity and growing economies of people who potentially are more vulnerable, such as Indigenous peoples within our country, it's a positive thing. But on the other hand, there was also and still remains a concern around the ability for Māori to exercise control and governance over their data. So we call that tino rangatiratanga, and it was a principle or a right that was guaranteed to Māori under our constitutional framework. In particular under Article 2 of the Treaty of Waitangi, where Māori were guaranteed full, exclusive and undisturbed possession of all lands, forests, estates, fisheries, and in the Māori version, other taonga. So taonga loosely translates as things which are precious and valued to Māori, and data underpinned by knowledge as a vehicle for the transfer of knowledge was considered by our Waitangi Tribunal, our Standing Commission of Inquiry, when hearing the claim as a taonga. So what that meant was, and if I might, I'm going to quote here, the treaty confers a relationship of a partnership, as I said, between the Crown and Māori, and tino rangatiratanga, or governance over taonga. I'm going to now quote Professor Jane Kelsey, who's an expert in international law, who is also an advisor to one of the Māori advisory bodies to our Crown agents, who's also in the room right now. What Jane said is that tino rangatiratanga, with respect to this particular claim, doesn't just mean a partnership, it means a constitutional relationship. When the state does something, iwi Māori have a right to be there in the centre of that decision making. And the claim was raised because at that time, around 2016, when the inquiry began, we weren't at the centre of decision making. As a result of the inquiry process and the matters raised within it, thankfully, our government established, or enabled, I should say, a number of different engagement forums for Māori to engage directly, and Te Taumata was one of those, and Ngā Toki Whakaruranga, which Jane advises to, was another one. So it's important to note that, I think, bearing in mind this thing of the two-sided taiaha, it's not just a vehicle for, it's a fantastic vehicle for economic development and inclusion, but there are also particular concerns that we had as Māori that may be shared by other social groups within your communities, that we now have a better model for addressing those, ongoing dialogue, closer to a partnership arrangement with the Crown. And I'm here because I think that I'm talking about it because it's a nice precedent that we want to tell others about, potentially something we could also adopt.
Thank you, Tanya. I mean, this is interesting because you're bringing a different perspective to the discussion that we normally have in here at WTO in particular, because that is mostly about legal obligations and economic progress and development. But you're representing, a communal interest or societal interest, which often gets forgotten in economic debates.
And thank you. And in the context of, you've reminded me of an important point, with coming back to world trade rules, what it has meant, and we've also got our chief negotiator in the room on e-commerce, is that New Zealand has held fast to a provision which enables our government, when subscribing to the international trade agreements around e-commerce, to maintain the provision in any domestic responsibilities that they have under the partnership responsibility to Māori. So our government has ensured that those exceptions are written into e-commerce provisions.
So your government is actually responsible to protect that. Okay, now let me move over to Luke. I think everybody here knows, you too, that e-commerce has transferred the way consumers engage with certain businesses. I mean, whether you order things online, whether you order a ticket, whether you actually take a car to the airport or somewhere else, you have virtual medical consultations. It's everywhere, and it has revolutionized, I think, the interaction. But these changes have an impact on the labor force and presumably labor policies. I want to hear from your experience. I mean, in the world of e-commerce, is the labor force, or the newer labor force, if you can call it that, is that driving labor policies, or is it the other way around? And then maybe a second point is, how do you balance between protecting labor interests while at the same time stimulating, a new and fastly developing economic sector, which is relevant for progress and indeed also for job creation. I mean, that must be a pretty interesting but also difficult challenge. Look.
Well, the way how you describe it, indeed, it sounds difficult, but I think let me start by saying clearly that as a trade union movement, we are certainly not opposing any new technological development, including e-commerce. And I want to make that clear from the start, because that's sometimes the assumption. Trade unions are defensive, are conservative, they don't support these kind of developments. That's certainly not the case. I always say that we don't have to be afraid of new technology, we have to be afraid as workers from all technologies. So in that sense, the future is there and we need to manage the future. But the word manage the future is, I think, important, because it's clear that new technological developments, including e-commerce, should go hand in hand with making sure that labor rights are also guaranteed, that social conditions are guaranteed. And I think that combination and that understanding is for us the basic point, because let's be clear, if I make it a little bit broader, e-commerce, platform work, okay, there are some issues when it's about precarious work, when it's about irregular working hours, when it's about other issues which are actually not regulated. So I think if we want to keep people on board in this whole new development, then we just cannot ignore the importance of labor rights and working conditions and social conditions. So in that sense, we are supporting the development, but it has to be done in hand with making sure that laborers and workers are not paying the price of this development. I just give you as a background that for the 2025-2026, the ILO will work on standards on decent work in the platform economy. So in the framework of the International Labour Organization, this is also recognized, and it's also a request from member states, but also from the social partners, the employers and the trade unions, to work indeed on some standards when it's about platform economy and when it's about e-commerce. I think it's important that if we start to realize that we need to regulate that a little bit, and that we have to make sure that the labor rights are not going backwards in their standards, then we also have to recognize that trade unions and employer organizations, business organizations, have to play a role together in social dialogue, in collective bargaining, on regulating that. I've been to Estonia often, I must say, and I also know that the way how they integrated that and implemented that in the country was not done on their own. It was done in a very inclusive manner, where all the parties were involved in shaping the future. And the example of Estonia is, in that sense, for me also a kind of benchmark how it can be done. So I think it's certainly something that it's risky, but we need to understand the challenges. We need to know that if we don't manage it well, then we will not continue to have the support of millions of workers which are currently working in this platform economy and in this e-commerce. So that's what I would like to say. It needs to be regulated, but it's not that we oppose this trend, not at all.
Well, I think I knew that already, but it's good to actually hear you say this, because it's true. It's a presumption that in many people's mind that trade unions by definition are against innovation and technological progress, which you clearly are not. I think you touch upon a point.
We are using it even ourselves, so why should we?
That's true. Well, that is a logic that doesn't always apply to many areas. Now, but you mentioned the point of regulation, of course, gets closer to, what the organization I represent stands for, and I'm here to moderate, not to discuss my organization, but it certainly puts you, closer to the discussion that is ongoing, or maybe not ongoing, on the other side of the road. And I wanted to ask, and that's to the benefit for everybody here, Maureen, can you say a little more about what is actually going on in the actual ministerial conference on the specific issue of electronic commerce? And there are multiple areas people are talking about. There's a moratorium, there's a work program, and there's a large group of members that are discussing an agreement. And that comes to this question, look, do you do it on your own? Do you do it multilaterally? Do you do it with a group of countries? which organization do you go to, which organization has the right one, you know, in one area or the other area. I think that's one of the challenges. But can you say a few words about how you see things going on? And you don't have to share anything confidential yet.
No, e-commerce and all this topic and the e-commerce moratorium actually and prolonging that for us from our perspective, not us as Estonia but also EU, is actually one of the key topics. So there are much more knowledgeable people in the room about this issue and have been done the leading work here. But for us, and thank you, Luke, for very kind words about inclusivity, this is a key element because we see the need to continue with the moratorium from the perspective, as I started off, when the country basically relies a lot of e-commerce, digital services, transmission, electronic transmissions included that, then we see it as something that would limit actually the opportunities that are there, the whole world, not only us. And therefore, I think the moratorium should continue. And we see it actually the way that shapes positively the new developments, as you mentioned, also in the world. So otherwise, we put, let's say, possible discriminatory costumes to something that which is developing fast. I fully agree that regulations on any new technologies and actually inclusive approach how to regulate something which is new, which is maybe unknown, and the legal basis missing, it's something that always should be looked at it. In the same time, I think we shouldn't, through the regulations, limit the opportunities for new developments to go ahead. Mm-hmm. We can, at the moment, everybody speaks a lot about AI and so on, how to regulate that. I mean, I can come back to the digitalization and digitalizing the whole country or society is that, I mean, it's there, right? You won't put it back into the bottle. We won't ever go back to the paperwork. So when something is kind of, is it the technology? Is it an approach? Is it Blackboard workers? I mean, different way of working, literally. So I think it's wiser to see how we agree on the rules, regulations that actually supports all the parties that are in it, but also gives the opportunity to these different areas I just mentioned flourish because when they support wider innovation development, any country in the world, be it us, be it some other corner, does it support the economy? Sure it does. I think one example I want to bring here, I've been talking and visiting a lot of African continent, for example, and one of the causes, or which is addressed always, is, for example, that why countries impose taxes to the startups. That's a good question. I have no idea. Because if you want economy to be innovative and have new ideas, you probably would give them the opportunity first to grow, and then you look at in the next step that how you eventually tax it. So I see it a bit in the same way, and that is in the general our approach.
If you listen to the points that actually all of you are making, although you spoke a little bit about barriers, it sounds like, okay, this is something that should be acceptable to everybody. We should all follow your country's example, and everything will be fine. Now, in the real world, and I'm not saying that my world is the real world, you see a lot of questioning and opposition. And I want to ask you, Josie, you are a practitioner, you're not a services provider, you are a manufacturer, which makes it as more specific, as you said yourself. I mean, when you hear both Luc and Marine talking, and even Tanya talking about looking like cultural protection, societal protection in agreements, as an entrepreneur, does that sound like something you would support, or you would fear, or you're somewhere in between?
So I think just taking taking more the inclusive element of this talk. I'm a massive believer in what you said about protecting communities. So how you do that with how the fast pace of digitalisation is happening and protect jobs, that's not my job to work this out, but I have a view on it. And I think we talk about sustainability quite a lot, and I think the thing with sustainability, it's focused just on something that's green. It tends to be focused just on carbon footprint, but actually sustainability is also about communities. And if you destroy communities, if you don't educate people, if you allow a big difference between, in inverted commas, the top and the bottom, you end up without a sustainable community or civilization going forward. And I think there's plenty of examples of empires and businesses that have fallen because they've taken that stance that it's better to drive for the growth and drive for the money than it is to also protect the people in the community. So in answer to your question, I'm a massive advocate for particularly what you're saying around you've got to protect the communities and the people. And I think one of the approaches we take at Wallcool, just to kind of bring it to something that I have the day-to-day on, is around education of people. Mm-hmm. So I think as soon as you start upskilling your communities, you start upskilling your people, it becomes more inclusive. There's better jobs, the community grows, the economy grows, and it isn't just about growth, it's about sustainable growth. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a few, I mean, we're a family business, so I think that kind of helps with that legacy and the kind of more family values. And I think my view is that because SMEs take up such a high, produce such a high percentage of GDP in the world, and a lot of those are family businesses as well. So just to promote the family businesses, the MSMEs have a platform with their people to create those community engagement, to educate. They've got the platform of employees and team that could help to upskill. And therefore, you talk about digital gap, but there's lots of gaps across all of it. So I think from a not really, I kind of answer your question, but I guess what I'm saying, I'm completely behind, considering people within this, because that is absolutely important for the future. But I do think there's a step back from that digital gap question of upskilling first, and then you can address that from a community perspective.
No, I mean you're a commercial operation. Yeah. But you share a number of concerns that people have that are not in the commercial. You wanted to react, Henry?
Yeah, no, I wanted to actually first react to what you said. I mean, one of this example, I want to say that Estonia has done it our own way. It doesn't say it is applicable everywhere else, because everybody, every country, every situation, trade union, business has a completely different elements. I mean, your perspective is different to that inclusivity issue that we have. Meaning that our inclusivity, I mean, including everybody into the digital development was more about reaching out to the elderly people, education, key element, raising the digital literacy, meaning the literary you can use, you know what it means, including everybody to the method, so to say. In our case, it's a very strong digital identity that everybody has, meaning you don't leave anybody out. You don't say that only, certain people have an access to it, but you have to give access to everybody. But then you have to also educate, particularly in first range elderly people, to reach out to the rural areas, to create a connectivity to the rural areas, then have on board children from the very early age, because then it comes natural. So I think I just wanted to underline that very key elements, but you have to think about these challenges that possibly your country or community faces, and we can only serve as a kind of excellence, the example of the experience that we made, but I don't think it's always capable to, you cannot copy that, like literally, because the challenges are different. We have always been very open to share our experience and say also, don't go that way, we try, it doesn't function. So we can also, we're always ready, what I always like to use is, look, we, as we say, there's like smart people learn from other people's mistakes. So we offer to be that mistake to learn from also in that path. So, but the path is always different and the challenges are different.
Can I just make an example of that, exactly the other way around? So the UK have an ageing workforce, and that's partly some of our inflation. So as an example, one of our biggest challenges is how do you upskill the ageing workforce? Because actually we've had people who've come to work with us that switch on a computer. Can they use Excel? No. So there's an educational piece for not to lose the older generation too. So that's just an example from our side, that exactly what you're saying, that difference between different communities have those different challenges, and I think the UK is the opposite end of the spectrum around age.
Okay. No, I actually want to go to Tanya, because you actually wrote something on how to ensure that e-commerce support indigenous-owned MSMEs. Again, it's a specific focus of something you want to protect and at the same time move forward. You're all saying kind of the same thing. How did you portray that, and did it actually work, or does it actually work? Because I think that's at an international level the challenge. How do you put everything that you're talking about, inclusivity, protecting certain communities, at the same time being sustainable, in a framework that will be continued and that will be there for a longer period of time? Because I hear you, but the challenge will be, how do you actually integrate it into something which is more binding long term? Again, I'm not talking about the WTO per se, more general. But what was your experience there? You wrote about that.
Yeah, the paper that you refer to came out of a thought leadership exchange between Indigenous peoples, and in particular our group was all female, from Canada, Australia and New Zealand. And it was on inclusivity, Indigenous people, a female perspective towards e-commerce. The first point I want to make is that to be cautious around presuming that just because something exists and is quite freely accessible to all, that it will be taken up equitably by all. And that the opportunities to leverage off that resource will be applied equitably to all. Because in our experience, that isn't the case. What came out of we carried out a survey of entrepreneurs who were using digital platforms and e-commerce to trade, and they were female. They were small businesses for the most part, and that wasn't the case, and I'll get into some detail in a minute, but I have, before I do that, just to set the scene in the context of New Zealand's e-commerce environment, want to share these stats with you. Apparently, I researched these particularly for this presentation, 95% of New Zealanders use the internet. So we're quite saturated in terms of our digital capability in New Zealand. And 70% of us shop online. We're only 5 million, so my children's generation, who are now of young adults working age, were born with technology in their hands, and they don't really know anything different. My 5-year-old knows how to set up. Oh, sorry, the 9-year-old. The 9-year-old knows how to. He has his own YouTube channel, and he figured that out himself through YouTube. YouTube teaches them everything these days. So we're heavily saturated in terms of our digital savvy, generally as a country. The projections are that the e-commerce market revenue will equate to over $10 billion US by 2027 to New Zealand. So it's a significant and important market. At the same time, in terms of small businesses within Aotearoa New Zealand, 97% of businesses within New Zealand have less than 20 employees. They are small businesses. Of those, 72% have no employees. So you can see how if we're talking about a mechanism which is going to elevate trade and make it more accessible for small enterprises, it's a significant thing for New Zealand enterprises. And 62% at least have their own website, which demonstrates the likely use of digital platforms and e-commerce. Interestingly, no statistics on the uptake by Māori women. So, in terms of policy, how can we address the needs of Māori women if it's not something which we're inquiring into? And we find that often. Not just with e-commerce, but across the broad range of issues that we grapple with as countries. Data is often collected by ethnicity, data is often collected by gender, but it's very rarely aggregated by both gender and ethnicity. That makes it very difficult for us to argue a point, which is why we had to carry out our own surveys on the need to what were the barriers? What were the opportunities that we grasped as SMEs, female entrepreneurs, and Indigenous? And then what were the barriers for us? So just to conclude these stats, in 2022, around 76% of Māori enterprises, the Māori economy is a significantly contributing. It's a thriving economy within Aotearoa New Zealand, and it always has been. At last count, it equated to something like 68 billion, which was not an insignificant contribution to our economy. And 76% of our enterprises, again, are using a digital platform, which is slightly higher than general businesses within New Zealand. Of the Māori economy, 40% of our enterprises are owned by Māori women. We do know that statistic. So it's an important group to focus on in terms of leveraging and developing contribution to our economy. All right, so of our survey, do we have time for a few findings from the survey in terms of the opportunities that small businesses owned by Indigenous women were?
If you can
just very quickly,
because I want to give people the opportunity to ask questions.
Yes. A couple top three. Female Indigenous Wahine Māori entrepreneurs and other Indigenous entrepreneurs valued the ability to have values-based business practice built around e-commerce. So a lighter carbon footprint, very much in line with our value sets. That's one typical example. Things like the ability to enhance culture through e-commerce platforms, using digital platforms to do things like continue to teach and educate around our culture and our language is another key example. And also the ability to design services that had a social or community contribution as a give back. Again, very much in line with our values. But the challenges that we face, the top one was that there was an insufficient focus on growing Indigenous female entrepreneurs, not enough investment into that area, so much so that we often can't access that investment. What investment does exist. I'll leave it there so that others can.
No, it's very interesting, particularly the statistics and the last part you just mentioned. But it consistently comes back to your focus on very, let's say, you focus on something very focused. I'm saying this wrongly, but you really want particular things to be protected and promoted. And the challenge, and this is where again this international element comes in. How do you make sure that you promote what you're looking for in terms of economic development, but at the same time protect the interest that you stand for? And that goes for a smaller company, goes for unions, goes for a government, and it goes for your particular interest. Now, before opening up, I want to give you one remark from yourself, because you are very used to dealing with protecting rights, in negotiations with governments. I mean, is there anything that we could learn from, not just in relation to labor, more in general, in how you deal with certain things that need to be protected, while at the same time, as you said yourself earlier on, being in support of progress in this technological new area? I mean, how do you do that? Can we learn?
Let me go back to your introduction on this second round, when you refer to what was going on at the other side of the street. We believe that it's absolutely important that we go to binding rules, to some binding and joint understanding, and that this should be done at a multilateral level. So I think the joint statement initiative, and I'm not going into the details because I'm also not directly involved, of some countries to try to influence then the debate in the WTO, we have to be careful, because that could lead to a situation where the voice of a few, or a few strong, would then also be dominant in the debate in the WTO. So we believe very strong in the consensus dialogue that needs to take place on the WTO level. That's one point. Second point, yes, we need to regulate. Let's be clear on that point. I mean, are we going to leave the future of the world in the hands of algorithms without any regulation? Are we going to do that? I don't think that no one is really waiting for that. So we need to regulate algorithms. We need to regulate the way how we deal with that technology. And that should be based on a rights-based approach. It should be also have the idea of benefits sharing. So the benefits of what we are discussing today should not remain in the hands of a few or the happy few, and the rest are just using it or maybe even going backwards. So we need to have some principles. So and we need to have some agreements on how are we going to regulate it. So in that sense, I refer here to one example, and that's my last point. It's we need to have transparency. So I think the debate at the other side of the street is also about how do we deal with source codes, how do we deal with data flows, how do we deal with data localization, and what is the role of governments into that debate. So I think all that is important. But the example that I would like to raise is the example of Spain, where they have adopted in 2021 the so-called rider law, which actually agreed that people that are working in the platform economy are driven by algorithms. They have a boss. The boss is not maybe a physical person, but it's an algorithm. And in that sense, they should be considered as a wage worker and not as a self-employed. So, but that means that we need to regulate also that algorithm. And so in that sense, our call as trade union movement is to embrace the future and to embrace the developments, but on the other hand, also make sure that we regulate all these developments in such a way that we keep on, as humans, that we keep hands on what's going on in these technologies. And that is not only involving workers and people that are working in this economy, but actually it involves the whole society.
Thank you very much, Luke. We have 10 minutes left, and I want to give the opportunity to people here to pose questions.
Yeah, there's also one.
Please keep it short, and don't preferably not make statements, but ask questions to the people here. I'll start with you here, sir.
Thank you. Actually, the idea of regulating the technologies and new technology, the idea I have heard a long time ago, like 5 years ago, that they are using the airline aviation simulation systems and regulation as a base so that they can cap the time to put to new regulations, and that could be helpful. It's just an introduction.
No question here, right?
It's not a question,
Okay.
just to...
Let's just go around the table next to you, my friend.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Emmanuel Wachando from the Institute of Economic Affairs at Civil Society in Kenya, a think tank. And my question to all the different actors represented is what scope you think there is for early warning for the kinds of socioeconomic trends that can actually serve to obstruct some of the initiatives towards inclusive trade. So, for example, if a country now this is like Kenya is pursuing irresponsible fiscal policies, for me as civil society, I would be there trying to ring the bell, and I wonder what you think the scope is when similar things are going on anywhere around the world, to have early warning systems and to coordinate, at least, civil society in one country calling their guys in the other and saying, look, if this thing persists, all these other grand initiatives we're pursuing could ground to a halt because of the knock-on socio-political effects of, so suddenly, I mean, you can probably imagine them with your experience. That's my question.
Let's take two more, and then if you're okay with that, and then we see. Jane, you had your finger on, yeah.
Kia ora, Tanya. One observation and one question. One observation is about the irony of us talking here about inclusivity when across the road the NGOs are not even allowed to hand out press releases. So there's a very selective form of inclusivity that the WTO seems to currently be embracing. But my question is about, as someone who works on the legal part of these agreements, there's a disjuncture from what I am hearing here about the need for community sensitivity, room to make mistakes, flexibility, etc., and the kind of rules that we see in the e-commerce agreements that are about constraining those spaces, largely devised by and for the big tech companies. So I'm interested in how much your constituencies actually know about what is in those agreements and what effect those agreements would have on the things that you've been saying you value.
Okay, thanks. I'll ask the panelists to focus on the second point, right?
Yeah, Bernie, you're dealing with the first one.
I know. Yeah, and then we'll go to the panelists.
Thank you very much, Bernie. Tanya Butzek, another Tanya, but this time with a J. I am part of the trade union movement, very much focusing on European affairs, but also have an international transport workers leg, so I'm very interested what Josie had to say. I would actually have a question to all four of you, and I think that was partly also triggered from the Estonian experience, because what I think understood also very much from my Estonian trade union colleagues, there is a huge trust in the government. And also what I heard from the Maori experience, your partnership approach protected by the Constitution gives you also some trust to be part of that. But the general question is there enough trust also to have negotiations on such a sensitive issue, important issue, but sensitive issue with all the constraints that you mentioned at the level of WTO? And maybe to throw in that, because like the wider perspective is, if you look at another multilateral institution that, of course, is very much also regulating in the sphere of labor, for instance, what the ILO is planning on platform work, which is very much linked for us there, are we not pre-editing something just in the trade world that precisely then is going to constrain the other important elements there? So question, is WTO the right fora to do those negotiations with the question mark on the constraints?
Okay, let's take these questions now. I think some of them are related to government and trusting government and whether the government is telling the truth or not. I mean, can I start with you, Maureen?
Sure. Trust. You bring in the key word. I mean, that is one point. I mean, I go into the digital and into the whole e-commerce element, and goes connected with the point asked there about how involvement of how much actually who are affected know about the process and regulations. Indeed, in that case, Estonia, the key element was trust, and that's how only why it's functioning actually. Because when you setting up a government which runs digitally, no paper, then the key trust is the system that you put into the identity of every person, meaning everybody has to be sure that this is not misused, and this cannot be misused. I bring you, it's a technical example, but we have gone all through there, working with the government, is that our digital identity is based on different technological methods. One is the electronic ID in the sense of chip card, there is a mobile identity, there is an app, so there are different opportunities. But we had a moment where the producer of the chips of the card, there was a theoretical risk that one of the elements on the chip is something that can be accessed from outside, so to say, can be breached the security. The question is, when the government gets to know that, there's a question, what do you do? Your whole digital society relies on the fact of the trust that government doesn't have a backdoor to your digital identity. So to go repair that, just like that, what do? You misuse the trust. So actually, we went outside, publicly say, this is the issue. The way we can solve it is this and this. We ask your understanding that we have to change now 700,000 of the cards because there's a potential risk. And we're telling you that exists. That was the only way to keep the trust in that issue from the whole society. If you would have gone on the way that's like, let's do it on the back door because the opportunities are always there in that case, I think that wouldn't have survived. And that comes with also the fact about how open are we, actually, those involved, and also not only involved, but also affected by this kind of negotiations and this kind of regulations. Is that in our logic, in our system, that just we have to talk publicly to them. We have to involve all the economic sectors in that case, for example. And it has to be set out for the legislation is in Estonian in Parliament is also that it's set out there in the platform that's called something like today I regulate, meaning that everybody can come in and comment on the in preparation of regulations which are on the legislative side. And I very much asked the question WTO. I mean, if that's the right forum. I mean, Estonia has been very open economy to. And what I wanted to underline before is that regulation, yes, and you have to regulate in certain way, but you have to regulate it the less the better in our logic, because from the economic point of view, quite often we see it. I mean, I can focus maybe zoom in a bit in EU level. There are certain elements that are fully over-regulated because it doesn't help anybody. It's more a bureaucracy. It's about the barriers that you poke. The different barriers are set up. Whom does it help? Does it help the business? Does it help the society? Maybe it helps only to certain interest groups. So the question is how you regulate, what is the most efficient way to regulate, and don't over-regulate. So question is there, and I can ask the same. I don't know. I'm not sure, really. Maybe there is a point that we should regulate less but better.
We're actually out of time, I'm being told
Sorry
by our timekeeper. No, that's okay, it's okay. Does anyone want to say something very shortly, in like 15 or 20 seconds? Luke?
20 seconds.
Okay, one.
So first of all, to our colleague there at the end from Kenya, I think the warning looks to me a little bit negative. I would say exchange of best practice. Yes, that we can certainly do, and we do that already in the trade union movement, on how we deal with e-commerce and with platform work more in general. Secondly, is the WTO the only organization that needs to work on this issue? No, absolutely not, because there are links with taxation, and that's a link. There are links to the social agenda, which is for us more linked to the ILO. So I think it's part of the debate, but it's a broader debate that we need to do at multilateral level under the umbrella of the United Nations.
You're asking someone from the UK about trust of the government. So I won't answer your question about trust of the government. No. But I'm giving you my answer that I'm not going to go into that in here. The one thing I will say about trust, though, is my opinion. You were talking about commerciality. My opinion is a mentality shift from working for the shareholders as the main interest for business and the main interest generally, who's going to make the most money out of this. So stop being driven by how much money we can make. And profit is important. It keeps the world going, to have that money coming through. My belief is, and to answer your thing about how you solve it, in my opinion, the utopian world is we stop trying to make the most money and we try and start making enough money that can be shared around and give us a sustainable future. So it's utopian, and it's probably something that's going to be very difficult to do. But I think just to come back to that point around how you solve this, I think the focus has to move from being the most money to the most sustainable amount of money.
Okay.
And
20 seconds? And
yeah, 20 seconds just to respond to Jane's question. I think it's an excellent question, and it's such a highly technical area that it's most likely that the majority of civil society within each state don't understand. And on top of that, the technicalities, and on top of that, compounding the issue is the fact that negotiations at this level happen for the most part, for the majority in confidence. In our arrangement, what we need to do is entrust in our technical experts, and we're lucky enough to have some like Jane working alongside us, really strong allies. But again, I'm not sure, and I would hope that others have implemented similar arrangements in their own states and economies to ensure that all interests are at the table when you're negotiating such important things on behalf of all, an inclusive approach to benefits for all members of your community.
Thanks, Tanya. I'm not going to summarize. We don't have time for that, and it's not worth it anyway, because why would I do that? I mean, you had different views on the table, and I think inclusivity is about having different views and different experiences. I mean, that's the only way to come to any kind of international rules or international agreement. It needs to be inclusive, trust, and transparent. And there's still a lot of work to be done, and I know what I'm talking about. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
I mean, it was a pleasure. Thank you for being here.